Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the press conference for the CPA BIMR Election Observer Mission on our findings. I am the head of mission, the Honorable Shelia Rogers-Webster from Anguilla. Here with me on the panel is the other members of the observer team. We have the Deputy Head of Mission and Short-Term Observer, Mr. Jamie Green, who is a member of the Scottish Parliament. We also have Ms. Mercy Castiles, an election analyst. We have Martin Vickery, the elections coordinator from CPA. On my right, we have Dr. Stephen Aiken, the Deputy Speaker of the House of the Northern Ireland Parliament. We also have Armin Rabish, the election analyst, and Nikki Davis, an elections administrator from CPA. In the early mornings of Friday, 25th October, the CPA BIMR mission observed the final votes counted and the results published of Montserrat's general elections. Within 12 hours, that mission saw the new government and the leader of the opposition sworn into office in a smooth and peaceful and efficient transfer of power. Overall, Election Day was efficiently administered. The election results were accepted by all stakeholders. There were no requests for a recount, and there has been no legal challenges to date. The mission commends the many individuals whose public service and hard work enable this successful exercise of democracy, both in the preparation and the execution of Election Day. The election was transparent, fair, and reflects the will of Montserratians who went to the polls on that day. Many procedures were followed conscientiously, although there were also areas where further attention and training would be beneficial to ensure a consistent application of all procedures throughout the electoral process. The increased turnout in this election, rising by 5%, and the high number of candidates demonstrates a high level of civic engagement in politics in Montserrat and the resilience of society that thrives on this island. This election was notable for the introduction of the new mobile polling station, which enabled persons to exercise their franchise in a more accessible and dignified manner. The mobile polling team visited the prison, a care home, and the hospital. The electoral officials, the prison, the care home, the hospital, the police, and the defense force should be commended on this successful innovation. Notwithstanding the successful execution of this election and these further beneficial developments, they were delivered against a backdrop of complex legal, constitutional, and regulatory frameworks. A comprehensive review of the electoral process and the legal frameworks within which they operate may prove prudent and enhance future elections. This could review issues such as the voter registration process, candidate eligibility, the regulation of election campaigns, political party registration, and rules on campaign finance, among other things. On Election Day, the mission observed the opening of polling stations, voting throughout the day, the closing, and the counting. The mission observed all 3 polling stations, including 12 polling stations across the island's 6 divisions and the mobile polling station in all 3 of its locations. In addition to this statement, within 2 months of the election day, our mission will produce a longer final report with recommendations which the mission believes will enhance future elections. We thank you for the opportunity to observe in this beautiful island, and we thank you for all the hospitality that has been shared with us. Thank you. At this time, we will now open the floor for questions and comments.
Good morning. Again, James White Jr. from Radio Montserrat. And We are very pleased that the observer mission, you were able to come and to observe the general elections. I just want to start by asking you, what are some of those areas that you're talking about that may need remedial action, and also look at a broader picture where we're looking at the possibility of electoral reform?
Some of the particular areas are the voter registration process overall, a review of the candidate eligibility, the regulations of perhaps campaign financing, but also political party registrations. Amin or Marcy, do you guys want to go in a little bit further?
Yeah, that's on the new government of Montserrat to decide, and also depends on the civil society advocating for possible reforms. So we don't want to prescribe any reforms in this respect, but we have heard during the electoral campaign that there have been questions whether to go back to the old system or to continue with the single multi-member constituency system. But for this, probably it needs a broader discourse and debate what's best for the situation of Montserrat.
Good morning, Keola Green from Radio Montserrat. You mentioned some areas that needed improvement, as well as some trainings that should be done. Can you specify what exactly are those, and how would you recommend they being addressed?
Well, in this statement, you can find it in the body of the text, what are the key areas that we are suggesting, and then there's going to be a final report with concrete recommendations as to what we think should be done. Again, it's going to be offered to the government, to the election administration, and to everybody we met, so they can take on from that. But again, here is anticipated. Let's say when we talk about candidate eligibility, we met with candidates, we met with journalists, we met with election administration and so on, and there seems to be a general view that, for instance, civil servants could run on elections or not, could be candidates without resigning or having another alternative. This is up to the government, to the Legislative Assembly to explore, but there seems to be consensus on a change that should be made. The same thing goes with domicile. Not everybody had the same understanding of what meant to be domicile or resident. We talked to many people. Some of them claimed that it had to be a step on the soil. Other ones felt differently. We think that those things should be maybe defined in the law, but to avoid further interpretations, or different interpretations. Again, in the final report, all those things are going to be well specified, and we're going to make reference to international standards applicable to every kind or every recommendation that we make.
My question was specifically to some training that you mentioned that needed to be done. That's what I was asking about.
Good morning. Perhaps I'll reflect on both of the first two questions. I think they are interlinked. I think there are two elements that we are yet to draft the final report, but in the immediate hours after the election, we were able to formulate some views on that. And I think that perhaps we could split these into two separate areas. The first being the day-to-day execution of the election itself. So that's the administrative process and the practices that are followed on the day of the election and the hours running up to it, on polling day, at the closure, and then through to the count and the publication of the results. In that short period of time, I think it's fair to say in all elections there's always room for more standardization of procedures. I see it from the point of view is that you want every voter to have a similar or the same experience as they go through the voting process. And for the most part, I believe that we observed that was the case. But of course, as is always the case, there are differences in the way that things are done and the execution of the voting process itself. That is an issue, for example, that could be addressed through further training. It's the sort of thing that arises perhaps if the polling staff, for example, it's their first time doing the role. There are obviously some people on the island who have been doing this for a very long time and are very well versed. But that's not to say that things change as well. So before my arrival on the island, some of my colleagues did observe a number of those training sessions and were very impressed by the delivery of the training sessions. But that's not to say there's always room for more work going in advance of the election day. I appreciate election days are busy, they're stressful, there's a lot of voters out there who are keen to participate in the process, and of course things will arise on the day that are unforeseen, and I'm sure we observed some of those individual situations where voters present at the polling station with very unique circumstances, and the presiding officers have to deal with those on the day, and again, for the most part, we observed best practice and a very careful demeanour in which the presiding officers dealt with these individuals. I was very impressed by the dignity in which many people were treated in that respect. However, there's always room for improvement, and our final report will outline some of that. That's the administrative procedural side of it. I think perhaps the first question alluded to is perhaps that bigger picture, and that's the landscape in which the election takes place itself. The rules around the regulatory framework which govern the campaign period, the issue around candidate eligibility which clearly arose during this election and has featured in other reports from other CPA monitoring. And of course the constitutional situation that people find themselves in as well. So all of these things are interlinked, they're complex, they're a little bit fragmented perhaps, and that's been noted in previous reports as well. So I guess what we're saying is it's possible that we would recommend a wider and comprehensive review into the whole bigger picture to make sure that everyone fully understands what their roles and responsibilities are, so that some of the confusions that perhaps arose in this campaign could be prevented in future. That, of course, these are just recommendations, and that, of course, will be for the current or future governments to implement if they so choose, and the legislators.
Okay, as a follow-up, I'd like to get a feedback from our analysts. You know, what are some of your findings initially? Mercy and Armin in particular. Just give us an overview of your findings during the election period, and just to speak of some of the areas that you think need specific attention.
Well, as the election analyst of the mission, I've been focusing on the legal framework and also on judicial justice. So actually, the legal framework has to be reviewed. There are many inconsistencies and ambiguities within the law. They should be clarified. The difference between vote and ballot, they are still not clear. As said, eligibility criteria, the criteria to become a voter are not clear, and they are very lacunes, like issues that are not regulated, and they should be regulated according to best practice. For instance, campaign finance. For the matter of transparency and level playing field, it should be regulated. Those are like some areas. Also regarding electoral justice, we noticed that, for instance, candidates can be registered without meeting the eligibility criteria. So no one is to check whether they meet the criteria or not. And this one should be specified in the law to avoid further problems. This is one, like few of the issues that I paid most attention to. And regarding voter registration on Army.
Maybe let me also point out 3 areas where we could see improvements. One is the independence of the Electoral Commission, from a legal aspect and conduct. Not to say that we have any suspicion or any worries that there were any irregularities, but it could be strengthened in the way it's operating. The second area we would also, and that has been pointed out already by the 2019 and 2014 CPA missions, the secrecy of the vote. Again, there is a ballot paper which has serial numbers on it. There's a ballot paper stub with the same serial number on it. So, and there's still legislation which might be outdated and needs to be reviewed, whether to adapt the way the society is changing, that also the law is keeping up its pace, and to strengthen the legal framework in this respect, and probably get rid of some of the outdated provisions which might be overly procedural. And the third aspect which I wanted to point out to you is the independence of the media. To say, look, maybe it's time for Montserrat to move on to have a true public broadcaster and ensure the independence of the journalists and the media. Thank you.
Malika Mackenzie Weeks, Allegany Express newspaper. Could you highlight some areas where Montserrat's election procedures stood out positively in terms of organization, transparency, and public engagement? And then what best practices did you observe that other small territories might consider adopting?
Thank you very much indeed. And the one thing that I thought was above all was the enthusiasm and the trust that people of Montserrat have in the system. And to have such faith in the democratic system is tremendous news. And I think it's something everybody from Montserrat should be very proud of. Everybody from the officials to the electorate to the party officials to the people standing. And to witness such a smooth transfer of power, bearing in mind what else is going on in the world, I was particularly pleased to see that as well. I thought looking at the mobile election process and taking the mobile ballot box around, that was absolutely outstanding. And it is something I'm going to be taking back to Northern Ireland and talking directly to our Electoral Commission about doing that. I thought that was superb. And I think everybody who was involved in that, I think it just showed to me that not only the pride that Montserratans have indeed in their own society, but more importantly, how people engaged in the system listened to the advice from the previous report that was done in the last election and acted upon it. And everybody involved in that should be very proud. The other piece that I think will be taking back is the work, and particularly the work ethic of a lot of your presiding officers and what you were doing within the polling stations, and the smooth and efficient way it was handled, and the friendliness of the election and the election process. And speaking as somebody from Northern Ireland, I think that's very refreshing. I hope that answers your question.
Would you mind if I also respond to that? Because I think it's very easy to get bogged down in the things that we think might need some improvement, and it's important to recognise the positives as well. And I'm very pleased you raised that. One of the things that's really struck me in the 24 hours after the results were announced was the speed and efficiency with which the transfer of power took place. In fact, on your own radio station's website, you published a statement from the outgoing leader of the former ruling party. And I was, we three of us on this table are also politicians as well as observers, and it was, the way in which there was a lot of respect for each other, and even at the swearing-in process last night, we noticed that mutual respect for those who had won and those who had perhaps lost their seats and were no longer in government. And that's really important. That's something you should really cherish. It's not something you often see after elections, for sure. And, that ability to come together, I think, is so important. And I hope that what we've seen in the last 24 hours demonstrates that willingness across the island, across political pacts and persuasions to work together for the greater good of Montserrat. And that's something that really struck me. And as Steve said, Dr. Aiken, is that feeling of people have trust in each other. So yes, of course, not everything is going to go 100% right on the day, but no one seemed to be trying to maneuver themselves to use the system for their own advantage in any way whatsoever. So I think that's really important. And the only other thing I think perhaps where I would like to see more of at future elections is more engagement from young people during the election. And I think that's maybe something we'll come on to in this press conference later.
Thank you. I'd like to chime in here as well. I think overall it was an excellent day. As both of my colleagues said, very, very smooth overall in the process. I was very impressed with the procedural fashion that operated in all of the polling stations. There was a clear system of how things should operate overall. When in doubt, I think that the presiding officers or the polling clerks would actually check the law procedurally, which is quite good, I think. I was also very impressed with the overall counting system. While I know there were a number of individuals who complained about how lengthy it was also very, very thorough. There were a number of checks throughout the process. There was a good overall system. And I think that's why there's so much trust in the system, and that's why you didn't have a recount or asking for that, because generally, the island respects the process. And I think that's something that's highly commendable. All presiding officers were extremely, extremely professional at every level, and I think that's critically important. Also, at no point in time did we feel as though anybody was trying to do anything incorrectly within the system. And I think, again, that goes back to the trust that exists in the system and the people of Montserrat, and that's something that is extremely commendable and needs to be reiterated. I think on a personal level, in terms of things that could be improved, I was quite, I thought the voter registration process was definitely an area where improvements could be made. I think for the most part, again, there's a lot of trust in the system, which is good, but in order for the island to progress in a certain direction, because obviously Montserrat may not always stay as trusting as Montserrat is. So we have to make sure that that voter registration process is airtight, but also the process of letting voters know you are not eligible, you're not going to make it on the list, so that they know ahead of time you're not on the list. There's a formal process for updating them about that. Those are just some of the nuances, because that is critically important as well.
You spoke of the environment that may not be the same going forward. What are some of the recommendations that you're looking at when it comes to the system and how we can improve on the system?
Firstly, I want you guys to give us a little bit of grace, because obviously we've only been on the island for about a week and a half, and the election is 2 days away. So we are still moving through our findings and ensuring that we are considering all the pieces. We are a large team as well, so we have to consider all the pieces. So we will be very detailed in our report, as well as some of the recommendations that we have specifically. I know you're trying to get as much out of us as possible at this time, but it's very important that we are also very careful about ensuring that the recommendations we make and the report that we give is really a true reflection of, one, what happens on the ground, but also the legal frameworks that exist. So it's also about rereading the laws and the legislation and making sure we also understand the process as well. So again, I think generally we've spoken about the areas where we think there's a lot more focus that should go into it. And ultimately, we will make recommendations that will sort of be very broad, but the territory and its people will have to decide specifically how you do that. For example, I'll give you an example. We talked about the voter registration process and finding persons. A recommendation of ours might be that, there needs to be a better system of identification in line with the voters list, right? You may decide to do that in a variety of different ways as a territory. You may decide to implement voter IDs, specifically for electoral IDs. That's one specific. So we would recommend broad areas, but then the territory would specifically decide how they would want to implement those sort of things. So if that gives some...
Curiously, there's been a lot of noise around the whole issue of campaign financing. That is something that, would be new for Montserrat. In terms of developing a management structure, based on international standards, how do you think we can proceed?
Well, that's a very good question and an interesting topic, because as you know, there is no regulation in place for campaign finance. So in a way that leaves the territory also very vulnerable to outside interference, because nobody knows how much money comes from outside into the campaign. There's no obligation to announce what kind of funding has been received by candidates or parties. There's no obligation to announce how much has been spent and on what. So instead of having this laissez-faire approach, many other countries in line with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, try to increase transparency and accountability. And probably first and foremost, it's important for the voters to understand where is the funding coming from candidates and political parties spent, because that gives a clear information what kind of interests they present. Yeah, and in this sense, other countries, they have, for example, for each political party a bank account where everyone can see what kind of funding has been received and what kind of funding has been spent. But there are different ways of increasing transparency, and that could be one way of going about it. But it needs a regulatory framework, and again, this is subject to probably a broader political discourse after this election, where Montserrat wants to go and how it wants to regulate campaign finance.
In terms of legislation, though, Amin, you think legislation would help in the management?
Well, the legislation gives the muscle to pursue a certain policy. So if there is an interest in greater transparency and accountability, then there needs to be some legislation in place to back that up. And for you as journalists also to ask the questions and ask for parties and candidates to be accountable and provide this information.
Okay, the role of the media is very important in everything we do in life, especially during election season. Tell us, what are your feedback on the media coverage during the process?
I think we can all agree of how important the media landscape is in any democracy. I think it's important for persons, both the citizenry, but also persons seeking office, to be able to have access to the media, to be able to have an independent operating media system. And I think that's one of the concerns that we've had in the media landscape within Montserrat. We are cognizant of the fact that the main media local radio station is essentially attached to a government department. And there are some limitations that exist within that structure. And as such, it limits the media from really being truly independent of government. And I think that is something that really has to be considered in Montserrat's landscape, whether the structure of the local radio station or the media landscape should be changed via legislation or from government. I get the impression that it is difficult to have and operate a separate media outlet because of whether the cost or funding, but it is important. It is important in a democracy for you to have a truly independent media. And we're not necessarily saying that the journalists themselves are not independent, but the structure that exists, that you operate in, by the very nature that you are under the Prime Minister's office and the association with that, it means that the structure itself is not truly independent. And we really would like to see a truly independent media in the territory. Yeah. Anybody else? That's good. Okay.
Can I maybe just add to that? James, you talked about campaign financing. If you look at the last CPA report from the 2019 election, page 12, there's a whole page on campaign financing, and a number of recommendations were in that report. The following page talks about media, which is the second question. So these are perennial issues that arise in some of the observation missions that take place in Montserrat, not just here, but elsewhere too. It's really up for the legislators to take on board the recommendations and move forward with them. Now, I appreciate that some of these are difficult decisions, difficult things to do, to regulate oneself, to put in further enhancements to how political parties and donations are handled and published, how to make oneself more accountable and transparent. But in terms of international best practices, the analysts, I'm sure, will confirm that this is normal, and it's okay to do so, but it does require legislative change so that even those who do not wish to make such changes are forced to make such changes, and that's important. So the legislators need to progress with some of those if they choose to so wish. And if they feature as a recommendation in our report, and the report before that, and the report before that, then clearly this is an ongoing issue. And we, the media have a job to hold politicians to account in that respect too. Of course, it's difficult to make a commercially viable media operation work in a small environment with limited audience, limited revenue opportunities, but it is noticeable that there is no fully commercial autonomous media operations. And also the unique position which the public radio broadcaster finds itself in terms of its relationship with government is an unusual one, whereas in most public service broadcasting environments there is very much an arm's length approach from government to ensure that journalists such as yourself have full autonomy to say what you like within the confines of the regulation around media, as you've discovered with some of your own programming output. So, it's important that media have that ability to scrutinise the process and the people involved. And I think that's something that features in many of these election observation reports. But again, we present these findings to those in power, and it's up to them to take forward those recommendations.
You spoke of self-regulation as against having policy in place to ensure that there is a structure, so to speak, to follow. What are the dangers, though, around self-regulation?
Well, I think there's some natural dangers around self-regulation. Obviously, you're not going to necessarily want to be too thrilled about regulating areas where you may be uncomfortable with. I personally operate in a very small island situation where there are also no campaign finance laws. And I think part of it as well is not necessarily that you don't want to be transparent, but there is a sense of that if transparency exists, there are a number of individuals who are honest, hardworking people that normally contribute to your campaign that wouldn't necessarily be comfortable with the general public knowing that they're doing that, because there's a potential for victimization of that particular business in a small island territory. So oftentimes it's not necessarily about not wanting to be transparent, but sometimes it's about, as a self-regulator, saying, I know the potential consequences, do I want to go down that road? So, oftentimes it shouldn't just be about self-regulation. The media has an important role to play. Society has an important role to play in really applying pressure, so that, because ultimately those who are self-regulating have really been elected to serve the people. So it's really the people's general interest that really should be the focus. But oftentimes there needs to be some pressure being exerted from civil society, from the media, so that those self-regulating know the importance of particular aspects of the law.
Okay. Let me just follow up there. There was the mention of the media and the role that the media plays in terms of dissemination of information. And I remember at our first press conference, I did mention that the media, although we've been probing, we have, in a number of occasions, we were unable to get that information to disseminate to the public. What are the provisions that you are thinking about to ensure that the media is afforded the information so that we can inform and educate the public?
Well, firstly, thank you for reminding us of that. I think this observer team, particularly Martin, has indicated that every single member that we've met with throughout the entire period of time that we've been here will actually get direct copies of the report emailed to them. The reports can also be found on CPA's website, so it's there and it's readily available. And I think it's very, very important for the media to read the report, read the recommendations, but also piece it out, because you're familiar with the landscape that exists in this country. You, more than anybody else, know how people are able to consume the information. And sometimes some of the information is very loaded in reports. And it may be intimidating for the average member of society to read the report. But I think the media can utilize the report, take out chunks of the report, and over the period of months, weeks, look at specific areas in the report where they may want to focus in on and provide the public with that information.
Okay. As we are prepared to wrap up, because we know you guys are on your way out, we do hope that you did have a great time in Montserrat. I know it was a lot of hard work, but I hope you still had time to enjoy a little of what the Emerald Isles have to offer. But I'm going to ask the question of what steps can be taken in the interim to implement the mission's recommendation before the next election cycle?
I think there are a number of steps that can be taken. One, there are a number of key stakeholders involved in the electoral process overall. One of the first steps is that all the stakeholders involved in the process, one, they actually read the report and read the recommendations, because as simple as that sounds, sometimes you look at a report and there's no attention paid to it. So all the persons involved in the electoral process, so the Electoral Commission, the Governor's Office, the elected representatives, the media, everyone involved in the electoral landscape reviews it. Also, perhaps looking at areas that can be prioritized, because a comprehensive review of the electoral process, constitutional reform, these are not easy things to do. These are not things that you can do in a month, in a couple of weeks. These are things that actually take sometimes years. It takes continuous public consultation. It takes systematic reviews of the laws, of all the pieces of legislation, to ensure that they marry. So I think what's critically important is that the process starts very soon. Oftentimes what happens is you're waiting too close to an election cycle to review some of the recommendations from before. And I don't think it's intentional. It's just that oftentimes when a government or people are elected, there's so many pressing priorities that need to be handled and taken care of that this process kind of is thrown at the back burner. So it's very important that the process remains a priority, and that there's an actual systematic plan for over the next 5 years how you will do a comprehensive review of your electoral systems and processes. Any other comments?
Just to say that, if you see in 2 months' time a report, it's your job to hold people to account, to deliver on those recommendations. It's the people of Montserrat's job. That report is publicly available. We want to ensure that it's available and accessible to everyone on the island, every voter or non-voter, every resident or non-resident, anyone who has an interest. That will be available to them, line by line, word by word. And it's up for people to hold those tasked with delivering on the recommendations to account. We will present them and then pass over the mantle to somebody else. And in the hope that at the next election, as you say, much of that progress can be made. And in fact, if you compare the last report to the 5 years later, the election that we observed, a lot of the recommendations from the last report were implemented. Some changes were made. The mobile polling stations is a great example of a specific recommendation that actually came to life. And that's positive. That fills us with joy that actually that our task is not in vain in that respect. So we don't, it's difficult to expect every 100% of all those recommendations to be implemented in 5 years. But that's what they're there for. They're there in black and white because we strongly believe them to be important to future democracies and future elections. So on your point about our welcome, I think we've all been made to feel very welcome. We have worked hard. We haven't had a chance perhaps to enjoy the beauty of the island, but we did drink from the well that promises we will return. So we've all had a drink of that now. It's too late to go back on that. So hopefully next time we will get to enjoy your company in a more leisurely way.
And thank you. Speaking as somebody who comes from another Emerald Isle, way back that way, whatever particular direction, and it's particularly wet and miserable at the moment, I am leaving the island with mixed feelings. Somebody said to me recently, if you've really had a good time, that you really feel sad about leaving. I'm feeling pretty sad about leaving. And it's mostly to you, the people of Montserrat, who've made us feel so very welcome. Just to talk to your salient point, look at what was in the previous report. Look what's coming in the next report. And if the things that were in the previous report are in our report are still there, ask the questions. Ask the questions of the politicians, and also ask the questions of the civic society. What do we want to do about this? Do we really want reform to make it better? Because we're just here to help and give those ideas to give you the opportunity to do that. Look at the previous report, look at the next one that comes out, and ask the critical questions from there. And I think that's going to be a very good foundation for keeping what you've got here, which is actually quite precious. Keep it precious. Thank you.
And as we continue on a lighter note, how easy or how difficult was your job here in Montserrat? How easy or how difficult did we make it for you? And what role do you see there being for other international observer missions to Montserrat for future elections? Bearing in mind that we got to a close to stellar review from you today.
I think overall it was really excellent. It was very, very easy for us to perform our jobs. First of all, we were very welcome. We were very engaged. Everyone that Martin would have reached out to would have responded very positively, would have found time to meet with us. But also in the meetings, there was quite a bit of candor. There was a lot of trust. People were very open with us. They were very candid. They spoke about the concerns they had, but also positives, and it was really great opportunities for very open dialogues. I think by the end of the week, we had a good, honest, real sense of some of the challenges that exist in Montserrat on the ground, both in the electoral process, but also in terms of the economy, the social climate, and so many other things. So I think, and I think that's very important, because yes, we are election observers, but part of being election observers is understanding the social and economic landscape that exists in any territory that we operate in. And I think we wouldn't have been able to do that without, how open the individuals that we met with were. And I spoke to my team, the team, and one of the things that I said to them, I felt so good on the morning of election. I was able to stand outside in the crowd, and I was able to engage with a number of individuals that approached me, spoke to me, and many of them were you could tell were supporting different political parties. And obviously some were not very happy with the results, naturally. But there was such a very respectful and open and light atmosphere that exists that is very unlike when any election results are called. And I think that is really a true testament to the people of this territory. And I think that's something that you guys should really, really be proud of. And I really want us to reiterate that, because there truly was a peaceful transition of power in this country that is unlike many other territories.
Can I come in for a quick supplementary? One of the things I would like is some of the politicians here, because we're all part of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Assembly, is if some of the politicians from here joined an international observer missions. And I'd be delighted to see what they thought of elections in Northern Ireland or Scotland or Wales or anywhere. I can't promise the weather, but it's important that everybody is self-aware. It's just as important for us as it is for there. And as much as we are part of a democratic process as well, we need to be observed, because a lot of things that we do sometimes will need closer scrutiny. So I would encourage any of your politicians who wish to get involved in the process to come and observe other elections and report back. And that way we can help build. Thank you.
So, Doc, what's the criteria for having politicians here? Oh, I was just wondering when we were going to hear from Martin.
Good morning. Good to hear from you. It's very straightforward. It's through the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. So we provide training for parliamentarians who are interested in taking part of these missions. And then very simply, we have an applications process. People put themselves forward. And then the regional secretary of the region of the CPA that runs these missions, we go through all those applications and we put the mission together. And yes, we'd be delighted to receive applications from the newly elected or re-elected members here.
Thank you very much for that, Martin. And as we close, ladies and gentlemen of the Observer Mission, we are very, very pleased that you were able to come and to observe, and that we can have this press conference and we can learn ways in which we can improve on the process and on systems. So on behalf of Keola Green, my colleague at Radio Montserrat, and Malika Mackenzie Weeks from Aliogana Express, we would like to say a special thank you to all of you for coming, and we wish you a safe return. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much. We definitely appreciate that. Thank you to the people of Montserrat. Generally, congratulations to the newly appointed government, but also we wish the country overall success over the years, months, and weeks to come. Thank you.